good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whenever you're watching this, wherever you're watching this. Jags to riches. Woo. James Peters, thank you so much for your time. Straight to it. Excuse me. I just wanted to quickly make a video trying to make this as fun as possible, just kind of going over some of the Boston Celtics' more disappointing losses so far through the first half of this season. Let me ask you, how many times just through the first half of this season have you heard in a post-game show or some breakdown somebody said, this is the worst loss of the season, right? Right? I'm sure you've heard it. NBC, CLNS, maybe with me, Bobby. I mean, how many times? Worst loss of the season. Worst loss. This one, that one, this one. So I simply decided to ask the question. How many worst losses of a season can a team have? I've compiled 7 specific games that I've researched. Actually, the losses and the disappointment stung enough that I knew most of the disappointment right off the top. But through some research, again, 7 games that I have narrowed it down to. Let's review the 7, and at the end, I want your help in helping me determine what has been the worst loss of this season. Let's get to it next, guys. So let's review, shall we? Starting with the November 1st loss versus the Chicago Bulls. I believe this was the first glimpse, the earliest season heartbreaking loss, as there would be a point heading into the fourth quarter where the Boston Celtics would hold a 19-point lead. However, when looking at the final score, the Celtics would lose 114-128. Yes, they ended up losing by 14 points after holding a 19-point lead. Now, this would be the game that would see Marcus Smart consequently call out both the Jays, stating that they have been improving and we're proud of them, but he was referring to himself, but what can I do when standing in the quarter not touching the ball, basically was the message. We do and have experienced issues with ISO ball with this team in the past, and I think Marcus in the early season frustration simply called it out. Now, he did receive some backlash, and especially because that actual game, he had 0 assists himself. But they actually did have some positive results as they would go on a run after the fact. But then you may say, wait, what about 2 weeks later when they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers? That was pretty similar. You would be right, as once again, the Boston Celtics held a 19-point lead late in the third quarter before they decided to let the Cleveland Cavaliers go on a 24-4 run led by Ricky Rubio, who has been playing phenomenal prior to injury this year, and Darius Garland absolutely dismantled their defense, where Garland would hit the game-winning free throws with 9 seconds left to win the game 91-89, yes, by 2 points after the Celtics led 52-38 at half, and again had a 19-point lead late in the third. Now, Tatum would start to show his recurring theme in this one with his 1-for-8 3-point performance, and the Boston Celtics team shooting at 26% from 3. Now, after the Cavs lost, the Celtics, wouldn't give us anything to really write about when it came to heartbreaking losses for nearly a month. But then came December 8th, and the loss to the Los Angeles Clippers. And the Celtics and Clippers, the Celtics love to give us some real great performances when they've been playing the Clippers this year. Now, on December 8th, no Paul George, and the Celtics would go on to lose 114-111. Now, why was this such a bad loss, James? Well, That was because a gentleman by the name of David Boston Jr., maybe you've heard of him, well, you probably did after that night, seeing as how he went for 27 points in 25 minutes off the bench. Who was this gentleman? Oh, just a second-round pick, a rookie. And by the way, Jason Tatum missed the game-winning three-pointer at the buzzer. Well, more like game-tying three-pointer at the buzzer, but you get the point. And then on to one of my personal favorites, the December 27th Minnesota Timberwolves loss. Oh, who could forget the 108-103? No Karl Anthony Towns, no Anthony Edwards, no D'Angelo Russell. Now, there was no Jason Tatum on the Celtics side, but I'm sure Minnesota would have said, hey, we'll give you Jason Tatum if you give us Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and D'Lo. Why would they say that? This was at, I guess if you want to call it, the peak of the health and safety protocol, 10-day contracts when they really started to get, pushed. And a gentleman, a former Celtic by the name of Greg Monroe, hadn't played in several years, I want to say 2016 to be exact, gets a phone call, hops on a plane, signs a 10-day contract, and decides to have nearly a triple-double against the Boston Celtics. In 25 minutes, he would go for 11 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists. Now, where did the points in this 108-103 loss come from, you might say? Oh, by a gentleman by the name of Jalen Noel, who had 29 points. And in night, I would say the first name, but I forgot. He had 20 points. These would go on to be known as the Minnesota Timberwolves G-Leaguers, as most of these gentlemen were either on 10-day contracts, weren't in the league, such as Greg Monroe, or had been playing for the G League just a few weeks before. But the Celtics hadn't quite got the disappointment out of their system, because 2 days after the Minnesota game, remember what I said, the Clippers, December 29th against the Los Angeles Clippers, the Boston Celtics would lose 91-82. Now, most of the other games were pretty close, with exception to the Bulls game, 2-3 points. This one, not so much. So why is this the worst loss? What's going on here, James? There was no Paul George, no Jason Tatum. Seems pretty even, right? Well, once again, led by a former Boston Celtic, Clippers Marcus Morris would slice and dice the Celtics, but that really has nothing to do with it. The C's would disappoint all by themselves, all on their own, as they would shoot a season low 4 for 42 from 3, which for the mathematicians out there is 9.5%. 4 for 42 from 3. And another one of my personal favorites. Welcome to 2022, January 6th, against the New York Knicks, a 105-108 loss. And this one to me is one of my personal favorites, as I suggest this might be my pick for worst loss of the season, as they would blow a near 25-point lead. Yes, the Boston Celtics had a 24-point lead at one point, and they would lose the game on an R.J. Barrett game-winning 3 with Jason Tatum basically hugging him, as he shot the ball, and nothing but net. And by the way, this is an R.J. Barrett who is a mid-30 whatever percent from 3 at best. Now, just to add salt onto the wound, what is another theme we've been hearing? Former Celtic. Well, maybe you've heard of a gentleman by the name of Evan Fournier. Guy that the Celtics traded for last year, didn't sign, he went to the Knicks, hasn't been playing that great this year, right? In fact, against most teams, he averages right around 11, 12, 13 points, somewhere in that ballpark, right? No, not against the Boston Celtics. In 3 games this season against the Boston Celtics, Fournier has gone for 35 or more points in all 3, including a career-high 41 in this 108-105 loss. And then, of course, that brings me to this most recent loss several days ago against the Portland Trail Blazers on January 21st. A 109-105 loss. Where to begin? Obviously, no Damian Lillard, recently had surgery, no Larry Nance Jr. The Celtics were basically at full health, minus Marcus Smart. Celtics would blow a 100-89 lead with about 5 minutes remaining. The fact that they went 6 for 17 during the final period, or how about the fact that the Celtics didn't score a single point outside of free throws, let's give them credit where it's due, for the remaining 7+ minutes of the fourth quarter, 7:19 to be exact. This would also be the game, that Jason Tatum would reach his famous 20 straight three-pointers missed streak. Losing to a team that is about one bad phone call away from blowing it all up, who is pretty much going to be in a tank mode soon enough, rebuild clearly. To lose to that team led by Simons, and obviously respect to CJ McConnell, but that one, just based on who you were playing, it was not as bad as the Minnesota G Leaguers, but this was another bad one, guys, and especially when you take into consideration you lose by 4 points on a night. Tatum is 0 for 6, 0 for 7 from 3, and you don't score the final 7 minutes and you lose by 4? Alrighty, so what are we thinking? Oh, man. 7 total losses. We've touched on pretty much all of them. I mean, I'm sure there's another one if you know any others that might have slipped through the cracks here. But basically, Chicago, the Cavs, both the Clippers lost, Minnesota, New York Knicks, and Portland. For me, it's the Knicks. Just when you're talking about almost a 25-point lead, getting that cut down late and then having RJ Barrett hit the game winner. By the way, you let a guy who's only, averaging 11, 12 points against the rest of the league have every single breakout 30-plus point performance of the season come against you. And in this loss, the 25-point deficit, he has 41, a career high. So for me, it's that New York Knicks one. I could see the G League Timberwolves one. I could see that most recent Portland one. I could see the 4 for 42 Clippers. I mean, there's so many. I mean, even those first two, the Bulls, the Cavs, the 19. I mean, that is why this is so disappointing and upsetting, is because when you really look at the state of the NBA and the East, I mean, you're talking about the 4th and 5th seed are only 4 or 5 games ahead of us? You know what I mean? And then when you talk about the big 4, the number 1 seed, you're talking about the Bulls, the Nets, the Bucks, and the Heat. They're all 6 games ahead? 7 at the most, maybe now? 6, 7? My point is, this is just 7 games, right? What about the fact that the Celtics are 4-12 in games decided within 5 points? Essentially the crunch, the overtime, the close games. 4-12. So when you think of these 7, or you think of those 12, which I'm sure a good amount of these 7 for the most part are included in those, all with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, just a few of those, half of them being swung the other way, takes the Celtics from a play-in to a firm playoff seed. But again, I was in this very weird spot trying to decide if to even release this. How do you release a most disappointing loss, a day after Jason Tatum goes for 51? Yeah, talk about breaking out of a slump. He's 20 straight misses, and then he goes 8 for 14 from 3 in a 51-point performance. But you know what I liked about that? And maybe this is me, that just because there was so much football and incredible football games going on this weekend that I haven't checked enough of Twitter or seen. But you know what's funny? Remember Jaylen Brown's last incredible performance, that triple-double, in that Kendrick Perkins versus Jason Tatum debate, that whole beef that started? Do you remember what the tweet was? Jaylen Brown has a triple-double, but Jason Tatum is 6 for 19 with only 19 points. Carry on, right? How funny, though. Tatum goes for 51. You want to know what Jaylen Brown's performance was? Remember, 6 for 19 points for JT. Jaylen Brown, 5 for 18 for 18 points. So almost identical performance-wise as far as the last time one went off like this and the other one not so much. But why I'm happy and it's a clear improvement is I didn't see no shit. I didn't see the negativity. I didn't see the Jason Tatum went for 51. Oh, and Jaylen Brown was 5 for 18. Progression. Carry on, guys. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? What has been the worst, the most disappointing, the one where you had to put your phone on silent because you didn't want to hear any of your friends, family, or anyone talk shit because you were just so upset and disappointed with this team? My pick, it was the January 6th loss to the New York Knicks, 108-105. Jags to riches. James Peters, thank you so much for your time. Let me know, guys. Take care.